Welcome. I'm your host, Paula Scatoloni, the founder of Transformative Harmonics, a podcast that offers listeners a synthesis of ancient wisdom and modern science. Hello, welcome back. I'm Paula Scatoloni. It's great to be back. I am excited to start off this next episode by myself before I start bringing on guests, just to set the stage for the podcast and perhaps begin to bring you into the world of sound a little bit more if you're new to it, or refresh your memory if you're coming back after listening to Embodied Step Into You. We'll do a quick refresher before we get started. I'd like to first, though, before we start anything, invite you to consider when you're watching this podcast or listening to it, that we are already working with the concepts of sound and frequency just by me talking and being present with you. So my invitation in this experience is to, although you could listen to it while you're driving, consider setting yourself up in a nice space when you listen. Maybe with a cup of tea or a cool drink, in a space where you're not multitasking and you're able to slow down and to allow my words and my presence and what happens here to move through you as if you were ingesting some nourishment or some vitamins. So this taking in, but not taking in through the mind, which is often what we do. And this may have some aspect of imparting information, although I'd like to invite you to consider that in the shift that I'm proposing in my work in this podcast, is that we absorb information, or we absorb wisdom through various pathways. And so information in the mind is one pathway where we may take in. But I would like to propose that in this experience together, that we allow your other pathways to also ingest and take in. So that requires that you are in a state of receiving or receptivity. And that we might consider what's being offered, whether it's sound, if I end up playing sound, or wisdom teachings, if I end up slowing down and bringing in some universal principles, or even our discussion about the science of sound, as that occurs through my exchanges with those that I bring on the podcast. That there's a level of relationality between us, and that you allow yourself to take in and ingest, just as if you were receiving vitamins. And the vitamins that come through sound, whether it's my voice or the sound I use or the frequency of sitting together, knows where to go. We don't have to direct it. That's one of the principles and concepts of working with sound healing, is trusting that when you're in a state of receptivity, the sound and vibration know where to go to begin to facilitate change. And so whatever you need to do to put yourself in a receptive state as we connect through this medium, I would like to invite that and for you to get creative with that. And these segments of me talking will be shorter than those that involve a guest. And so hopefully you can find a pocket, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, to really shift into that receptivity that we're cultivating in all of the programs at Transformative Harmonics, as we're cultivating the concept of of settling, of receptivity, of relational engagement, not through the mind, but through another place, right? Really embodied sense of presence. I'd also like to invite you to take in and allow what information or wisdom or knowledge comes, to allow what resonates to come. And if something doesn't resonate, it just gets put on a shelf. And Tom Kenyon talks about this as he calls it a box, but I call it a shelf. Gets put on a shelf, and you can return to it later at another time if it feels resonant or you'd like to go back. And resonance is one of the topics I'll talk about today, because today, as we set the stage, I'm going to talk about the language of sound just a bit. I also have a video that I've made that's on my website. It's a little bit more like a PowerPoint for your left brain if you want to go back and not take notes while I'm talking. So we'll talk about the language of sound, and then I will just do a very short tuning fork segment with you at the very end of this, which also does require sitting and creating some spaciousness so you can perhaps feel the vibration of the fork. So to begin, what I found fascinating when I began to study sound was that some of the language I found in other places I've already been, like the world of somatics or the world of body-mind centering. And in fact, I liked Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's descriptions of some of these words so much, I decided to stay with hers. And hers is from the world of movement, but it also translates to psychology and how we understand ourselves relationally, in relationship with others and with ourselves. So some of the basic principles that correlate with sound healing have to do with the concepts of vibration and frequency. And so as we look at how Bonnie might explain it, and also these would come from other places like wisdom teachings and somatics, that everything is vibration ultimately, and that we all have a signature frequency, a vibration simply being a pattern that establishes your specific blueprint of who you are. And so we're made up of thousands and thousands of vibrations that culminate into a signature frequency. And these patterns are like little eddies, and they support our capacity to expand and contract. Okay, so there's this fundamental movement that's within us all, in every cell of our body. It's vibrating. So I use vibration and frequency. I kind of interchange those words when I'm talking on the podcast. Ultimately, the summation of these patterns creates a resonance. And we think about resonance, I'd like you to consider when you meet someone that you feel good about. There's a good feeling, or you walk into a location, a place, and it just feels good, right? You might say, oh, I like that vibe. There's something that feels good, right? So that's an example of resonance, something that just feels good to you. It feels good to your system. Something that isn't in resonance, you might say, like, something doesn't feel good. Whether it is a sense of yourself in relationship, right? Or you just find yourself not in flow. Something wasn't flowing in a way that felt easeful. Okay, so that's the concept of resonance. So how these frequencies come together. And then ultimately, when we have enough resonance, and resonance can if something is very resonant, it's organized and it's in flow. Okay. So it can entrain, which is a different concept we'll talk about, something that's not in resonance into resonance. And so when we have enough resonance, we move into coherence. And coherence is when everything is in harmony, in sync. And so all of our organs have a certain frequency or vibration or resonance that when they're all working together, we have coherence within the mind-body system. Another way to think about coherence is the concept of when your emotions and your physiology and your nervous system and your behaviors all match, then we have coherence. When you're inside and you're outside, reflect each other, that can also be coherence. So that's how we might use that word. So in the process of using sound healing, there is a movement of these patterns that occur where your system will move from states of disharmony or incoherence into states of harmony, homeostasis, and coherence. And a process that describes that or illustrates that rather well is called Somatics. And I'll put a link to that. And I know Leslie and I spoke about it before, but you can see through the visual in a Somatics video that they're using sand on a plate, that in order for a system to move into more coherence, more health, it's going to go through stages of being disassembled and restructured. And it can look kind of chaotic before it comes into a new pattern, a new vibration, a new frequency. And this is what's happening at a cellular level with sound. And so I think it's a beautiful visual illustration. But it's also, I like to think of it metaphorically in terms of your life. You know, when you come into the sound programs that I run, your life can move through some chaos, whether it's emotions that come up that you are starting to feel, that you've been out of touch with, memories that haven't been processed, or life starting to happen. And there can be some disorganization that happens before you come into a deeper state of organization and coherence. And that's perfectly normal and appropriate for the work that we're doing. And so I want to normalize that, because in the psychoacoustics that I use, a lot of the time, the providers think, and the clients, that I'm going to put this on and I'm going to feel better and I'm going to feel calmer. And of course, the name of the products that I use might suggest that. But in the way that I use it, which is more transformative, deep transformation and change, we are going to go through some restructuring in order to get to a new normal. What someone who taught me used that word a lot, a new normal. What's your new normal? And so we don't just move there automatically. And so Somatics is a nice example of what's happening inside at a cellular level when we're using sound. Now, if we move a little bit further into the world of psychoacoustics, which is the study of sound and the science of sound, there's some other concepts, and you'll hear me talking about those more and more. There's some new music programs I'm using, and we'll talk more and more about words like entrainment. So entrainment simply means that we have one system or pattern that is now going to shift into another system or pattern. And so we are inviting something from the outside when we're using sound to influence a system or pattern that already exists. Now, I like to take that a step further to think about certain emotions. High frequency emotions like joy and love and compassion can entrain us into those types of states, or having access to those types of states, can entrain us out of stuck states of anxiety, fear, or terror. And those processes don't occur because we're doing something. It's simply about maintaining that state and living from that state and emanating that state. So whether we're talking about sound or we're talking about emotions as mechanisms we can use to shift and create change in another nervous system, either way, both of those are frequencies. And so we can start to think through the lens of frequency in many aspects of our life. As I began at the beginning of the podcast, my voice is a frequency. Okay, so your voice emanates your nervous system and tells us whether your nervous system is operating in a state of safety, receptivity, compassion, openness, or whether your system feels like it's under threat. And that will come through your tonation, your prosody, inflection, cadence, and word choice, probably as well. So, entrainment. Let's go back to that. The next thing to think about with sound healing and the programs that I use, and sound healing in general, is brainwave states. So this is called state frequency response. And so the states that I work with when I'm using sound are called theta healing states. These are states that we reach in meditation, and when we're in that phase between sleep and awake. And often that's what people feel in our sound journey programs. And in that state, we can begin to move into altered states of consciousness, or we can access the limbic brain where we have our memories. We can feel deeply relaxed and deeply at ease in these states. So they are considered healing states. So the last thing we're going to talk about is balancing the right brain and the left brain in terms of the hemispheres. So in sound healing, in some cases, there are certain programs that are designed to stimulate. It's called bilateral stimulation, stimulate the right brain and the left brain, and to move you back and forth. And the programs that I have used are from my training in brain spotting, which are called bilateral beats by David Grand. And these allow you to move into your memory processing centers of the brain. However, there's other programs that I use that are inducing this crossover between the hemispheres of the brain. And I do believe with the provider's presence and focus on the right hemisphere, we can entrain programs that may not even be designed to move back and forth to go more deeply into the right hemisphere. In the right hemisphere, very similar to the last concept of theta healing, we have the ability to drop into the subconscious, into the limbic system, into states of consciousness that one might call higher states of consciousness for exploration and to drop into states where healing, these are deep states where healing can happen because they're states of restoration and of non-doing and of being. And in these states, this is where we can activate our own self-healing capacity. So many of these words will come up in the podcast as I bring the guests on and we traverse the world of sound. And this gives you somewhat of an introduction into the concepts, and then you can dive a little further. I'll put a few book notes as well, if it's something you'd like to learn more about. So to end this program today, I'm going to use a tuning fork, and I'm going to talk about how I set up the sound healing in my programs. Very similar to when I started this episode, I do like to think of sound as something we're ingesting and we're allowing and receiving it to enter into us. And this very much has to do with our capacity to feel that whatever it is that's outside of us has our best interest in mind and is safe, and that it's safe to ingest. And that's not always something available to people. And so when we are thinking about our interpersonal relationships, that can get kind of complicated. But with sound, especially because in a tuning fork or the programs that I use or the way I use sound, we are talking about states that are resonant. It's a little bit easier to take in small doses. And one of the things we want to ask ourselves is, okay, how can I get myself or allow myself to be in more of a receptive state so I can allow this infusion to enter and go to the places where it needs to, just like a vitamin would or any kind of nourishment. So I want to invite you to start by taking a few breaths, natural breaths. But as you're taking the breath, on your exhale, I'd like to invite you to give permission to yourself to sigh. Make a sound as you're exhaling. Not only does this stimulate the vagus nerve, but it also allows you to really move energy with the breath. And everything is energy, and the breath is one of the ways that we engage that process. So go ahead and take a few natural breaths, and on that exhale, let yourself make a sound. And elongate that exhale with a sound. Sometimes people can move with it as well, give a little shimmy or roll the shoulders. Sometimes you may just push your feet into the ground. Okay? But these are very short somatic practices that we can couple with the sound to amplify and enhance their effectiveness. And as you begin to settle and find what I call your yield, you're coming into relationship with something, hopefully, that's behind you and underneath you. And this aspect, the behind and the underneath, is often something we don't think about a lot. Often we're very forward focused in our Western civilization on the what's next, right? And what's in front of me, and we're watching for the threat. So this idea of having support and trusting that something's there, something's got your back, is new for us. So we're cultivating those neural networks. So giving yourself just a moment to feel the underneath and the behind, as if what's behind you or underneath you is coming up to meet you. And you don't have to reach for it. It's just there. And as you start to notice this, you can simply ask yourself, well, what do I notice about my relationship to the support that's available? Am I allowing myself to receive this support? And if I find myself tensing anywhere, can I soften just 1% into that support? And as you continue to do this, I'm going to hit the tuning fork just a few times. And we'll see what happens. And some of you may feel this as it shifts your system. Some you may not feel it, and that's okay as well. Remembering we're working with the concepts of receiving, allowing, So I may experience this. What I've tracked in my own body is shifts in my gut, tingling along the back body, opening in the feet. More of a pulling down towards the earth. And this is typical if someone is able to track somatically of some of the phenomenon that may occur. So it can show up in vibration in the nervous system. It can show up in a sense of sometimes the quality of the sensations that we feel are associated with particular emotion. So if I stayed with that fork and explored a little bit more the quality of the somatic reaction I was having, I could pair that with an emotion. And that is much of Eileen McCusick's work, as she's able to pair the somatic resonance with the emotions. So we understand a little bit more deeply which emotions we're processing, as the fork is like on a record player, it's emanating your emotions. And then eventually, as we're continuing to talk here, I can feel my system shift and then I have a burp that just happened. So there can be a yawn, a burp, a sigh. You could have tears come out of your eyes, sometimes with emotion and sometimes without. And then in cases where we're not using the forks, sometimes it happens with the forks, but definitely with the sound programs that I use. When sound is used, we may start to see images. We may start to see colors. When we drop into those deeper states, we may start to see memories through our visual channel. We may start to process emotions that either make sense and sometimes they don't. As I said, you can just have a tear running down your eye with no emotion. But that is all still part of memory processing and processing that occurs during the use of sound. So I hope that this short video has given you a chance to begin to enter into the world of sound healing and integrate it and understand it, merge it with the worlds of psychology, somatics, and wisdom teachings. The last thing I'll say in terms of the wisdom teachings, we're having a renaissance right now with sound, but it has been used for centuries. So it's not new. It's just our understanding of it through the lens of science is now available. And so many providers, if you are one watching this, are interested in exploring it. And certainly, I know I've come across a lot of people who find that some of the other methods of trauma processing are too hard on their system. They're not gentle enough. And sound can be very gentle and very nuanced so that the changes happen almost under the radar sometimes. Sometimes they're very obvious. Sometimes they're under the radar. So you're moving through a transformational experience, and you can feel things happening, but it's very hard to explain sometimes because some of the places that are transforming are before we had words to describe. Sound can take us into the recesses of the mind and the preverbal world, where our first experiences of life were through sound and the heartbeat of our mother when we were in the womb. So it is very understandable and practical for me to think about the use of sound, to work with the templates and the imprints that occurred during our formation. And in my programs, that is often the direction we end up going. So I will leave you with this to chew on and to ingest as you settle into this topic. And if this has been interesting, then come back next time. I will have a guest and we'll begin to share and inspire each other with our stories of our own stories and narratives around sound, what we're doing with sound, also our own psycho-spiritual growth and where we are on that journey, because there's a big part of this program is about supporting people on the journey of their own evolution, their own psycho-spiritual evolution. And you'll hear me bring in topics that support that, whether that's the gene keys or somatic experiencing or sound healing. There'll be many types of providers who are going to share their perspectives, and we'll have some very rich and interesting dialogues. So it's been a pleasure to have this cup of tea with you today. and share this sound. And I welcome you back next time.